We are going to do a bleeding heart tutorial. I've got Arches watercolor paper. I've got two brushes, a size 6 and size 4 round, and I've got my watercolor palette. I used the Winsor and Newton Cotman palette. I added a couple other colors to it, a cup of water, and this great book. It's a flower color field guide. And it has great reference images for all sorts of flowers. And so today I thought we would do the bleeding heart flower. I think it's so beautiful. So I'm going to start out just by grabbing a little rose permanent, it's a beautiful pink color, and showing you the general shape. I think the easiest way to paint this flower is just to paint a heart with two little tails at the bottom. It's really simple. And in this tutorial, I only do like a couple straight on hearts of the bleeding hearts. And then oftentimes they're sort of bundled up or scattered to the side. And I just do little dots and dashes. And then they have a little part that comes down, and you can do it in yellow, you could do it in gray. It just adds, it's the sort of defining characteristic of that flower. And then for the leaves, use a darker green. I use a sap green here in this particular example, and just a few sort of jagged lines coming together. And so with that, I am going to get rolling on the tutorial. So I'm going to wet my brush, and I'm grabbing just an olive green. If you don't have an olive green, I would grab a sap green or a lightish green and add a little yellow or yellow ochre to it to get a nice olive. And what I'm going to do is just follow the stems down to kind of get an idea of the layout of how this composition is going to work. The stems on this flower are sort of snaky. They bend over, they cross over each other. And so already this is a pretty simple image. It's a really great photograph I'm working from. And I'm even going to simplify it a little bit more because it's not about being perfect. And it's not about replicating it exactly, but just sort of making perfectly imperfect work and kind of getting a feel for what this flower looks like. So I've got the stems sort of situated here. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab the rose permanent, which is just a light red or a light pink kind of color. If you don't have something like that, you could grab your lightest red and add either a little tiny bit of yellow or white. When you add white to watercolor, it does make it a little more opaque. It takes away the translucent quality. So that's something to keep in mind. I do it all the time. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just something to keep in mind here. So what I'm doing here is I'm starting to lay out some of the flowers. I'm doing a couple of the heart with the little tail shape throughout the stems, and then I'm adding just some little dots and dashes. This is a very loose way to paint this flower. I'm using a bit of water on my brush. I would say it's the consistency of tea. And what that does is it will make the color a little lighter when it dries. So more water you have, the lighter your color is going to get. And I'm doing that because I'm actually going to go back in later and add another layer of color. So it's a great trick with watercolor to work in layers and to add contrast and depth of color by adding layers. So I am just working my way through. I'm grabbing that rose quite a bit, and I'm thinking about different ways of making this flower. Sometimes that straight on, full on way of making the bleeding heart, and other times thinking about a side view or just these little dashes. So I'm going through and just adding them in anywhere that I think they should go on the stems. And I say I think that they should go because I'm sort of following the photograph. I'm certainly using it as the basis for this, but I'm not like counting the flowers and putting them exactly where they are in the photograph. I'm definitely taking some artistic liberty also just to simplify the image a little bit too. I want to know if any of you have these in your garden. I've never grown them before, and I think that they're so beautiful. I really, really love these flowers. So I'm going to go through and finish adding sort of my first layer of flowers. Right, next I'm gonna grab some white and just like a tiny little dot of indigo blue or Prussian blue, just like if you have a dark, dark blue. And I'm making a kind of gray from that, and I'm just gonna use that to add to the very bottom of this flower, the little bleeding heart. And I'm just gonna go around and dab it on most of the flowers. All right, next I'm gonna go in, and while those flowers are drying a little, I'm gonna work on the foliage or the leaves, the broad leaves. So I'm grabbing a dark green, just like whatever green you have that's the darkest green, and I'm gonna make it more of a forest green by adding some dark brown to it. I think that's a Van Dyke brown I grabbed. It's just a good solid dark brown. And that's gonna give me a really beautiful, like dark earthy green. So I'm gonna go ahead and start to add in different leaf forms throughout this composition. It will make it much more lively, and it will start to kind of look like it's wrapping up, like it's a good finished piece. One key is that if your flowers are still wet, and mine are while I'm working on this, really try not to touch them. Of course, the colors will bleed together right away. If you do, a little bleed is really, really beautiful. But if it's just too much and you end up with a muddy flower or something, just grab a little corner of paper towel, dab it to soak up that color, and then you can let it dry and then try to add a little bit brighter color over it. So no worries about that, but the quicker you can soak it up, the better. So I'm just going through, I'm adding these jagged leaf shapes throughout the composition. I'm using my dark green, and then I mixed in part, it's off screen, but my greens are right next to each other on the palette. The green that I used for the stem, the olive green, and then this dark green for the leaves. So in the picture, I can see that the stems are much lighter and more golden than the leaves. Sometimes they even turn a little red or plum colored. And so feel free to have some variation there. I did mix in a little bit of the olive green to my darker green just to help kind of make it look a little cohesive. And that's a great way to tie your color palette together. So I'm just going through adding leaves wherever I think they are, sometimes larger leaves, and then sometimes just little dashes of green to kind of help round out the picture. I'm also going back through and broadening my stems a little. When I first painted them, I did them very light, very thin, because I was just trying to get a feel for how this was going to be laid out. And now I'm going back in, I'm making them a little broader. And then also by adding a second layer, I'm starting to darken them a little bit. So I'm just going back through and kind of addressing the stems, thinking about how they look, thinking about line weight, thinking about color. And then now I'm also making sure I have a little tiny wispy line that connects the flower to the stem. I tend to leave those out or leave them for last and sometimes forget them. So now is a good time to go through and just suggest that connection between flower and stem. And this is a point you do, if you're touching that flower, you do want to make sure it's dry when you do that. You can grab a cup of tea and give it about 10 minutes, maybe 15, and let those flowers dry. Now I'm going back through and I'm actually using the exact same green I had before. I'm just adding another layer to some of my leaves or some parts of my leaves. And what that's doing is just creating a little contrast, creating a little bit darker part of the leaf. And I think that when you do this, it really can make your watercolor painting pop. So have fun doing that. Again, it works really well when your bottom layer is all the way dry, but it's not necessarily a rule. You can certainly paint on top of a damp layer. Just know it will bleed a little. It just creates a different effect, which is very beautiful as well. I'm also adding in some more gestural lines, just little kind of scribbles, more or less, of my brush, just to give it like a little bit more life. I added a tiny little sprout on the stem there. It felt a little empty, so I'm just making sure I do that. And now I'm going back through the flowers with that same rose color. I've also mixed in a little bit of orange. I've got a little bit of lavender. Anything in that kind of color family. Every flower is not the same. It doesn't all match, and that's great. It adds a nice variation, flower to flower, and also just different tones within the same flower. All right, and I think we're all set. I really love this painting. I hope that you had fun doing it. And I really encourage you to just explore painting this flower on your own this week, even. Just look up some different pictures. Maybe you have some growing near you. That would be really cool. And see the different ways that you can interpret it. Just have fun with it. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye, everybody.